In the last chapter of RK Motors' Legend of Le Mans, we took a look at the groundbreaking technology implemented by Ford and Carroll Shelby to dominate the 1966 24 Hours of Le Mans. It quickly became evident that the GT40's sheer power and speed were dominable factors in its ability to overcome the prancing horse, as well as its foes from Germany. In the fourth chapter of Legend of Le Mans, we'll discuss the importance of a keen attention to detail when restoring such a prolific vintage race car of this caliber. Where do you source the correct bolts? How long does a restoration like this take? How important is historical documentation? And many more questions will be answered. Follow along as Rare Drive begins to tackle the daunting task of restoring chassis 1046 as they research original photographs of the car and work backwards from there, compiling upon their existing knowledge of the 427 GT40s.
Well, a restoration of the scale that we're doing on 1046 to that level of authenticity generally takes 3,000 to 4,000 hours. A lot of that is spent with research, a lot of that is spent with dealing with the individual pieces, parts vendors, sourcing pieces. The GT40 Mark IIs are a very special car with a lot of rare parts that perhaps weren't rare at the time but are now rare. So we have thousands of images from every photographer that we can possibly find that had anything to do with the event or was at the event. And we refer to those constantly throughout the course of every day. We have hundreds and hundreds of hours of just staring at photographs and looking for every little detail because the photographs tell you everything. People can remember or you can think you know, but if you have a photograph, you really know.
The name Rare Drive says it all. Mark and the team are the leading experts in restoring vintage cars destined to be driven and enjoyed again. With over 28 years of experience, it's obvious as to why RK Motors Charlotte has tasked Rare Drive with such a historically significant restoration. But how does Rare Drive do it?
But one of the things about a restoration like this is you don't want to over-restore the car. You want the car to be how it was made, how it rolled out of Shelby American in '66. So in this picture we can see that we know that the race numbers that were painted in the white circles were done with a brush by hand. And when they painted the number 2 on the nose, the number went across both the nose and the spare tire cover. And where it bridged the gap, the paint just ran down into the channel because they just painted across the gap and the paint just ran down in. And you can see in this photograph the very jagged edge of running paint running down into the trunk jam. And so what we'll do is exactly that. We'll brush it and have the runs coming down.
Hours upon hours of meticulous research needs to occur in order to ensure the most accurate restoration. Due to chassis 1046's extensive past as a transmission test mule to being prepped for modern-day vintage road racing, many original parts have fallen by the wayside in preference for more modern parts, and it's Rare Drive's job to compile these parts and restore as necessary.
So these are the race number illumination lights on a Mark II. They are actually a Ranchero license plate. They're not particularly common, so we have scoured the entire world and probably bought every Ford collector's inventory of these lights to try to get a full set for the car. But we have finally, just this week, come up with the last one of the 6. The original seatbelts that Shelby used in the cars, there was only one, only for the driver, that's all they needed, were made by a company called GQ. The problem is GQ hasn't made harnesses in a really long time. And to know how they're made and to get them, I've been scouring the UK to find seatbelts. And we were able to come up with this original one that needs to be all restored and new webbing put in. But this is an original GQ seatbelt and it matches exactly down to these little grommets to the stitching to a picture I have of Bruce McLaren sitting in the car buckling it up.
Once all the original and period correct parts are sourced, most of the main assembling can begin. But with different parts than those that came off, where does one even source the right bolts to assemble this true nut and bolt restoration?
These are original bolts. Fortunately, this car came to us with 90% of its original bolts, so we have most of them and we'll get them replated back to their original. So I need to find the other 10% of bolts. The problem is, the company is still in business, but they've changed the design. So the new bolt has a recessed head, so it's slightly different looking. So if we can't come up with bolts, we're gonna have to have bolts made. So we have to figure out what the metallurgy of this is and then have bolts made with the proper logo on the head.
Mark and Rare Drive go as far as finding copies of the original race setup sheets that were dispersed to teams, so that not only the smallest parts of this car, but the hardware and even the alignment is as true to the original as possible. That attention to detail is what separates 1046 from other race cars of its era, and why this is only the beginning in the masterpiece restoration. So what's next for Chassis 1046? Stay tuned for the 5th chapter in the Legend of Le Mans series as the experts at Rare Drive begin to reassemble Chassis 1046 using all of their knowledge after countless hours of research to their advantage to rebuild Chassis 1046 to its former glory.